Exceptional Radio. Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening. Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio. Hey, good afternoon. It's the 10th of April, and it's starting to feel like spring, except for the last couple days where it felt like winter still. When we got some hail and some really kind of tiny snowballs from the sky. They weren't quite hail, but they were definitely not snowflakes. But you know what? It's April, and it's the Midwest, and I fully expect some other kind of weird meteorological event to happen in May that may also include snow or a heavy frost, because why not?
Yeah, we got full on hail over here. I mean, it wasn't huge, but it definitely was hail.
Yeah, it's like small marbles.
Yeah, yeah, it was loud too. And then we got some actual snow.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like, I went outside the other night, and well, would you look at that? It's snowing. It wasn't like sticking to the ground too much, and it wasn't like, I mean, it was technically snowing. It wasn't like coming down hard. It wasn't enough to go make a snowball or anything cool.
no, it was like it didn't. Yeah, it melted before it hit the ground. But for being it's supposed to be April showers, not April snowstorms.
Yeah, April
Like
snowstorms.
seriously, no bueno. Well, I know I've seen the weather patterns change a lot over my lifetime. Um, but it's like the the dynamics are getting even more extreme. And it's like, I think it's like already past the 90s in LA. Um, because I watched the David Lynch weather report, so I always know what's up in LA weather. But it's actually interesting to see, like, some days the temperatures will be the same almost, um, depending on the time of year. But then you see, obviously we're in completely different parts of the country, but it's like the extremes are it. If it's snowing here, it shouldn't be 90 there. That's too far of an extreme for this early in the year. Um, and that's where I'm like, it's getting more and more. The swings are becoming so much more frequent that I'm like, you'd have to be just completely disconnected from reality not to see it. It's like that bad at this point.
Well, I think I mean, the UN climate survey concluded that we are on essentially a runaway train towards an uninhabitable Earth, and their estimates are within the next, like 50 to 100 years or something like that, we're gonna be at the brink. I think that means we're already at the brink.
Right.
Like,
well, I saw someone posted, like, the Earth has been around for 5 billion years, and then British get control and destroy it within 500. It's like, Yep, that's about right. That's why I can't stand the British, man. The government is like British government is the worst, the absolute worst. American government comes in close second, but British government has historically just been. That's why our planet is on the brink of disaster. Basically, it all goes back to the British.
Well, Churchill said once that democracy is the worst form of government except for all of the rest, and he was talking about America at that time. So even Churchill could recognize the shortcomings of the British Empire. He wasn't a stupid man. He was a pretty shrewd dude.
Yeah.
Made some pretty fucked up decisions, but I guess I wasn't there, and I don't really understand the complexities of that era. So I can only really complain about the outcome.
Well, and
But man,
it's insane how much racism was just pervasive in government policy, where you're like, oh, they just didn't see non-white people as human beings for like, I don't know if they do quite yet, even, but at least they've gotten better at hiding it. Whereas before, they just didn't even care about hiding. It's like, oh yeah, we're just gonna treat these people as chattel. They're just property to be used for the ends of the British government and the monarchy, or whatever point it is. It's like it's not always necessarily a monarchy that's driving it, but the way the British imperialism is only just recently like, okay, we're not gonna be that racist. Like they got rid of slavery before America, but it's only because they had exploited it for longer. So it's like the way British government gets credit for like, oh, we ended slavery before America. It's like, that's like a real fudged account of what kind of happened. Where I'm like, the British just perpetually. I mean, even the Irish, man. That's why the Irish still fucking hate them. It's like they do that shit to white people too. It's not just brown people. They do that shit to white people too, and then it's like the way that they just exploit and extract value without any mind towards the future is why our planet is on the brink of it's not on the brink of destruction. It's on the brink of being uninhabitable for humans. The planet will survive. I always come back to that where I'm like, yeah, it'll be all right. We won't, but the planet will be all right.
well, I think that's the subtext of the sky is falling. It's not that the sky is falling; it's the sky is falling on us.
Right. Well, and that's obviously you get that, and our audience gets that. It's just I'm always of the mind like we're in this Christian narrative, a pseudo-Christian narrative that is built upon the notion of an Armageddon that really is just American Christianity centering itself and making itself the center of the universe, figuratively and literally. When it was in, what was, I guess, the 1500s when Christianity was like, yeah, no, we're the exact center of the universe. Like, fuck anything and everything, whatever you think. And it's like,
I mean, purely by accident, they are right. Like from any point in the universe, you can only measure so far, and so realistically, I mean, just by I guess it's a parallax variation of a few hundred miles between people, if they are different people, or maybe only a few miles or a few feet, but at any given,
well, it's only under a certain condition, because then
Yeah.
that's like there is a center of the universe in the sense of if the Big Bang like existed in the way that we have evidence existed, it's because the universe is expanding from that point.
Yeah.
Which is where, again, it's like what you're saying is not incorrect. It's more so it's a condition under which like
Yeah, I'm talking
if
about
you're
how it's
measuring
measuring it.
exactly. So that's the where it's like, yes, they got that coincidentally,
Yeah,
but it's still only a
they got
certain
really
condition.
lucky.
Yeah. I mean, because even then, it's like the Big Bang is a theory that was created by a Jesuit priest,
Yeah.
and it's not like I don't. I think people really are disconnected from how much theory is created by Christian scientists. Like the Big Bang is a full-on Jesuit priest.
Well, Christianity funded the sciences in Europe for quite a while, and they still fund sciences.
Yeah.
They have, like, the Vatican has their own astronomy. Well, I guess they're not. Is it a cosmology department?
Cosmology. um,
But they
uh,
had to establish their own departments to study this stuff too, so that they could refute claims made by spurious astronomers. I don't know. I think it's like one of those like bad faith things to say that the church was anti-science. I mean, it's
right. I mean, yeah, it's like something like 60% of what would qualify as scientists or academic scientists are like religious in some way. And you meet them and you're like, how the fuck are you a Catholic in 2022 having a degree, like multiple degrees? And you're like, okay, I guess. Yeah, no, these people exist. They're out there.
I
Um,
think it's like,
going to church on Sunday or mass on Sundays.
well, eventually they're gonna have a diminishing gene pool, and they will start to become a ethnic group. I mean, that's like a several hundred year path, I think. But
That's the basis for Dune, right?
yeah,
The
that's
Bene Gesserit are basically like the Catholics,
yeah,
and
they're the
then the
space
Fremen are
Catholics.
the space Muslims or space Jews, I guess, depending. Yeah,
They're the
that's
space. Um, yeah,
maybe the space Arab Jews.
they're the
I
space
forget what it is,
space Nazarites.
but I know the Bene Gesserit are supposed to be like directly
Oh yeah,
connected to Catholic.
they're
Like
totally the
I'm
space
fairly
Catholics.
positive.
Like
Yeah,
they're all about that
but then
Inquisition shit.
I feel like like I said, I feel like the because I was listening to a bunch of Frank Herbert interviews where
Hmm.
I know the Fremen are based on the Arab people, but I think the Jewish religion is more heavily leaned on than Islam in the actual Fremen lore. I could be mistaken, but it's out there. So again, it's like people could go check the shit if you want to like really
If you
see what
really want to
Frank
listen to
Herbert
Frank
was
Herbert,
thinking. Because he's awesome to listen to. Like honestly, I could listen to Frank Herbert talk about this shit all day. Because when you find out like the only reason he even wrote Dune was because he did too much research for an article. He was supposed to be doing an article on fluid dynamics of sand, and then he accidentally did too much research, so he then ended up starting to create this universe.
so when you said research that last time, I saw the air quotes and I heard the word hash. He did too much research and started.
No. But he was like going to these places and like observing the sand dunes and like going to different parts
Yeah,
of different deserts and like actually, observing these things. Cause then he was like, he was fascinated by the concept of sand moving like water over time, but it just takes a lot of time for that to happen.
sure.
But then also, um, the notion of people being able to use that fluid to manipulate like vehicles or some shit. So that's where, or manipulate the sand for the sake of using their vehicles. So it was like these types of things where I'm like, learning that informs the way I view the media. And that's where I'm like, even down to then the scene where Paul Atreides is like doing research about Arrakis. It's like that's a pretty cool meta like examination of how the story was created, where it's like dude's just sitting there doing research on the way to the planet, where it's like you can see Paul's very enveloped in the research, and it like fascinates him to the point, but it also prepares him for his journey. And if he hadn't done that research, he wouldn't be able to weave together the things that he encountered to get to where goes.
Yeah, I
Um,
think it's also a really clever mechanism to introduce the reader to the new planet and what to expect.
oh yeah, for sure. That
Like everything about
it's like
Dune is very. I feel like Dune is a very well. I mean, it's very obviously it's very well written, but it's there are parts of it that seem like he's using storytelling mechanisms so deliberately because of the way that they're working together. And the guy is very clearly well read. I think you had to be a writer in those days. I think you have to be well read to be a writer any day.
yeah, and honestly, I think he was willing to take risks
Yeah,
about um creating a universe that was as big and as expansive in its vision as it was, because I don't know if audiences, besides Tolkien, um which wasn't necessarily hugely popular at the time anyway, like it was being read, but I think the Tolkien surge came like in the late 80s, early 90s, if I remember correctly. Like the real obsession with the Lord of the Rings didn't actually start with the books, like original. Or I mean, let me rephrase this. People had read a ton of people had read the books, but once adaptations started getting created, that's when it really took off, and people were like, there was like a cult following, and
yeah,
that's where I'm like, I don't know how many cult followings of things were possible or existed before mass media, um where it's like
yeah.
they'll try to make it seem like there were, but there really
When's the
weren't.
emergence of the con, of the like the convention, this like the
I think the late 70s, like the first one was a Comic-Con, I believe, in San Francisco in
I
like
bet
79
then
maybe.
that's the beginning of that's the that's ground zero. That's really ground zero.
Yeah, because
Everything
cons
before
weren't
that's
even
a
popular then.
yeah,
I
everything
mean,
before
yeah,
that's
because
a
it's like the
cult.
first one.
It's a cult or a social club before that. But a convention is like you get
Oh shit, it was
you get
70. Okay.
you get like
It was
regional
San Diego.
involvement, and you get massive groups of people together that wouldn't normally be in the same city together. Conventions are great. All sorts of conventions, not even the ones you wouldn't normally go to. Like sometimes you go to a convention and there's like another one in the adjacent convention center, and you find yourself like wandering into the other one and realize, oh, this stuff's really cool too. What is it?
Hmm.
And it's like not related at all, but it's just as interesting. I think they're also called expos, like Consumer Electronics Expo.
The first Comic-Con only had like 300 people attend. So that's where, again, yeah, it definitely wasn't a thing in the 70s.
Yeah.
Like early 70s, it hadn't caught on yet. That type of like cult. Because then I think people will be like, Star Wars was the first one. I think that's even more retrospective of them to think that. And I don't think it had actually caught on when Star Wars first. Because people, oh, I went and saw it 4 and 5 and 12 times. It's like, yeah, but you're not the general public that like everybody who saw it didn't do that. It was like maybe
I wonder
one
when.
out of 100 people did that.
I bet Star Trek has had a better, a bigger, larger installed base, like ready for a convention than Star Wars did. Like, I mean, they had a head
Well,
start.
because it was earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah, it
they had a head
definitely had an early
start.
head start.
So they're just waiting for like Star Trek: The Motion Picture or Wrath of Khan to be released, and that's really when Star Trek will take off. and then again in the '90s with Next Generation and so on and so forth.
Whoa. Okay, so the first fiction convention was in 1966, where Star Trek had presence, and then the first full-on Star Trek convention was in '72. Several thousand turned up there, so that's where, yeah, you see Star Trek clearly seems to be the real birth of cons concerning numbers. Like, people were trying to do these things, but it seems like Star Trek had the real, like, okay, in '72, if they had several thousand turn up, that's like way ahead of the curve. If other, Comic Con only had 300,
Yeah.
which is funny to think of. Like,
You think?
so much of the comic obsession came from the pump and dump, like, where people thought they were going to get rich, and like it was actually just a bunch of speculators coming in and buying up shit, and then basically ruining the comic industry because the numbers were all fucked up. They were just buying up issues and issues indiscriminately, and then everything was selling out, and then the money dried out, and then the industries fell apart. Um, which is where Marvel. I mean, that wasn't necessarily why Marvel had to sell their rights, but it wasn't. It didn't not have an impact on that. There was a few things that led to Marvel ending up having to sell the rights, but um, this the way that, like, people have invested money trying to extract value from these interests, and like, oh, if somebody's interested in Star Trek stuff, I'm gonna buy up all the memorabilia and then hoard it and then put it back on the market. That shit started to implode. Um, so it's like, it's funny to see now. I feel like we're at the end of these uh, pump and dumps around people's interests, but the interest things aren't going away. So post COVID, I'm interested to see, like, I feel like conventions are going to get more and more concentrated, but it'll be less about like making money off the thing. It's like, oh, I just really love Star Trek and I want to go hang out at a place where everybody just really loves Star Trek, which is like, I think what it started off as, but now it seems to be returning to that because all the value has been extracted, and is like,
Well, no, that's. I don't think that that's the case. Paramount Discovery was just launched, and that's all about Star Trek NFTs.
oh god, oh yeah. I mean,
Which is
and
like,
I don't know if you saw the reaction,
dude, that's
but
like,
people are like,
that's the most counter Star Trek kind of thing imaginable.
that's the exact,
Charging money. Star Trek is like the opposite of spending money. They're like,
yeah.
we don't strive to accumulate wealth. We work to better ourselves and those around us.
Well, and that was the exact response I saw online. Like, I did not see one positive response to that announcement from any Star Trek fans, which is where I'm like, it's not gonna,
So in
yeah, the company can try it, but the fans aren't there for that shit.
on
None of them are
on the
happy.
show Discovery, there's an Eisenberg class ship to honor Captain Nog, and it's a bad motherfucker. It's like got floating warp nacelles, and it's beautiful. It doesn't even look like a saucer style Starfleet vessel. And they give it away on or they gave it away on the Star Trek game that I play after kicking ass for 2 weeks. I think it was like 2 weeks of ass kicking, and then they gave me this badass ship. And they're charging money for the NFT version of it, so you can have a little badge on their platform, in their metaverse platform. that you can get for free by playing a game that is like beta canon. So it's like it reflects what's canon, but also has, you know, weird crap that is may or may not actually exist in Star Trek. It probably exists. We've just never seen it, kind of things. But here's this example of a ship. I mean, you can buy it in the game if you don't want to earn it, but they're charging money, and it's not even a playable thing. It's just a image of the ship. I can fly this one around and make it blast out all sorts of colors for free. I can blow up
Yeah.
Borg indiscriminately and blast lasers and have cool lighty effects for free. And they're asking people to pay money for this stuff. It's like whoever is in charge of the Star Trek catalog at Paramount right now, they've demonstrated that they don't actually like Star Trek. It's really it's really sad. Like, man, show me with like a few actions how much you hate Star Trek. I'm gonna make people pay money, like extra money, like way more than normal, and not for like a collector's edition like wine bottle, Chateau Picard wine set. Like, I can see that being expensive because they aren't going to make very many of them. They're only going to make a few of them. Or like the blood wine set. They only made a few of them. And that's cool. I get that. But a digital fucking spaceship? A badge
And
of
that's
one?
fucked up.
That's
Well,
like...
because then that's like, we've been getting Twin Peaks coffee, and it's really good. But it's like, it would suck if somebody made some Twin Peaks coffee and it was like not, it didn't taste good, because then it would be like, oh, this is clearly meant to exploit my enjoyment of this TV show, whereas since it's good, it's like, oh, I can drink this along with the show and enjoy it because it's actually good. Whereas
yeah, you're drinking. You can drink the same coffee they're drinking on the show with them.
I mean, that's what it feels like.
Yeah.
But if it's not actually fulfilling the sensory experience that you're trying to get, then it's just exploiting your actual enjoyment of that thing. And that's what's fucked up about so many of the, like, I mean, how many video game adaptations of properties you watched did you play when you're like, oh, this fucking sucks? Like,
dude, I've tried.
They got me.
Literally,
they got me.
Every single one I could find, and I've only played. This is the only one I've stuck with because it's actually fun. And the rest of them are like,
well, and then it's free, right?
Yeah,
I think it's free to download.
It's completely free, and I have an ass-kicking ship, and I can like indiscriminately destroy Borg whenever I want. Like,
so you can't feel got when you're playing something for free or you're getting something for free, even if they advertise at you. You're like, okay, yeah. I didn't put any money into this. I don't feel like they exploited me. But then when I'm like, I'm looking back on what Iron Man 2 or whatever video game they put out, where I'm like, I can't believe I paid for that shit because it was just not finished. But they slapped the Iron Man name on it, and then they're like, "Oh, people are just gonna buy this because of that."
It was really pretty, though. It was really pretty.
It like parts of like the
parts that work,
cutscenes.
Yeah,
like the Wolverine video game was fucking amazing, but the Iron Man one was like not finished. It was fun at first until you played it, where you're like, okay, these controls suck. The story sucks. They had a great story to work with, and for whatever reason they did. I think it was the second one I'm thinking of. Like, I don't think the first one was necessarily bad, but the second one I think was the one where you're like, okay, they clearly just rushed this to market.
Or maybe just like Christianity, they were really somehow accurate in that the control software for the Iron Man suit is actually horrendous, and Tony is a terrible coder, and he just happens to get really lucky every time he flies that thing out that he doesn't kill himself. And that's the truth of the Iron Man suit. Like Rhodey losing his legs because he got blasted out of the sky, he was lucky that didn't happen sooner.
Well, that's the hammer tech is that.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, man.
That's what
the one that's twisted the guy in half.
You'll see, I think it was Hawkeye. He had a hammer tech arrow and his shit didn't work when it went to use it, and it just fizzled or some shit. Like, cause they always make fun of Hammer Tech. I think it was like Rhodey had some missiles that didn't work. Um,
Yeah.
and then I think Hawkeye had some stolen Hammer Tech that didn't work.
I think that's
If I'm not mistaken.
I always like the the hammer tech joke as it is, because really all those things are good for is beating things with. They're just hammers. That's all they
Yeah,
are.
yeah. So I was like,
I actually, what was it? Iron Man 3, when he's going up against AIM, and his suit's malfunctioning, it's running out of juice, and he's having all sorts of problems with his tech. I actually liked that story the most because it was like it, you know, at any at any point in a computer nerd's life, they've had some experience where one thing failed and then another thing failed, and it basically became like a catastrophic system failure, and then you find yourself like just scrambling to like stabilize your computer system. And of course, it's always like a power supply or some slowly failing component that's just kind of limping along, and you fix it eventually. But like to to see like the absolute fictional state of the art, breaking down a little bit, that's kind of nice because that's reality. Shit breaks. Batteries don't last forever. Even the best, even the newest battery technology, they're going to do a sodium, molten sodium storage because they can freeze ions in place when the sodium solidifies. And so now we'll have like up to, what is it? Up to 12 days, I think, or maybe it was 12 weeks of storage where once your battery is stored and it turns itself off and solidifies, oh, looky here, we can store this stuff for an extended period of time. And which is like, you know, pretty handy. It's one of the problems with our current battery technology is that they get used or they sit there and then they slowly lose their juice. But of course, I'm not I'm not really I'm not really looking forward to the idea of having a molten salt reactor inside my car.
uh,
I mean, it's salt. It has to get really fucking hot to melt. Like really hot, excruciatingly hot. But the batteries would be smaller
yeah.
and they would recharge rather quickly, albeit they would get really hot. Speaking of things getting hot, I noticed the other day I was looking at hard drives and like the M2 SSDs, the kind that fit directly into the micro PCIe slots, and they're getting faster and more storage, and the really fast ones are requiring. I mean, they've had passive cooling on them for a few years now, but now they're building active cooling solutions for these solid state disks because holy crap, to achieve these data throughput rates, they've got to run at excruciating temperatures, like burn your hand stuff. And so we're back at this point where we've just moved the heat from the processor to the RAM to the video card now to the disk. But do we actually need this kind of access speed? Like, I'm sure that there are a few places like the military or NASA, maybe like a spacecraft would need to have that kind of data transfer rate. But
I mean, honestly, Pixar at this point might need some shit like that.
yeah, but Pixar's been had
Like,
been making movies on like they made a movie on a Mac Mini Beowulf cluster, so they can they've demonstrated that they're really fucking creative.
they can streamline if they have to, but what I mean is like when they when they aren't like pushed to a deadline, running out of funds, they would probably need some shit like that where um I I think NASA would obviously need some shit, but that's where I'm like I think the way that the level of anim like rendering that it takes for like the modern
The animation
3D
studios.
shit. yeah, it's like way more uh hardware intensive than we I mean not you and I, but I think then it would seem like um it's like
I mean, that makes
especially
sense. That's a good use case.
like depending on how many objects or how they're putting it together because it's like if they're going oh my god yeah the amount of work if they're doing it frame by frame um I mean
Yeah, but
like
you'd think that they would just load it into RAM, which is still like exponentially faster at that point. There's there's
right but it
there
can only hold so much but I mean
yeah.
visual information just is so massive like audio information is one thing but visual information
Oh
when
yeah,
it's high
it's like
quality
10 times the requirements for your data to do video.
yeah
If
so
just
that's where I'm
for data
like
transfer rates,
because then once you get into like three dimensions it's
and
like
almost all of audio is offloaded to DSP or hardware anymore too. So
yeah it's just rendering 3D animation is like what and again there's ways where you can do it to make it not so intensive but at this point I'm thinking like the biggest studios like I said not when they're under pandemic stress or
yeah, yeah. I mean, I can see like
capital stress
a
they're
SAN
probably
built off of a bunch of computers that all have these things running as their like primary storage node, and then they've got like a cluster of SAS drives. Like I can see that functioning like for an animation studio. I guess for like the yeah, for somebody who's managing like creative content like that, that makes sense. But that we're also talking about like the highest end of the industry of the visual creative industry. You know, on the opposite end, I also read about a Windows system on a chip, a computer that fits in the palm of your hand, that supports two 4K outputs and all sorts of stuff. But it's not designed for like heavy utilization. It's an entertainment module type system, and it's doing things that computers 10 years ago struggled to do or couldn't even imagine doing, like 4K video. But they're baking in all these like decoders into the chip, so it can do hardware decoding of all sorts of streaming protocol. And that makes sense to me because smart TV, a television can last a long time. A television can last, a decade, but the computer inside it definitely does not. And I know this firsthand because my dad has a smart TV that we turned into a fireplace. And all it does is run a loop of a fireplace in his fireplace. And it's control software, the web OS or whatever it had on it, uh, doesn't do anything anymore. It could only access the most like some old portions of YouTube. No, no, not YouTube, of Netflix. It wouldn't access YouTube even. It wouldn't do Hulu. It couldn't access Amazon. It couldn't do anything. It wouldn't even access like a web browser. And then I got this notification that Netflix support was about to be dropped, and it's like, oh man, like this thing is pretty much useless. Oh, I better see if this thing works because my dad was going to put a smaller computer screen in this fireplace, but this one's a little bigger, and it's all self-contained. It has a remote. So I know that there's an end of life for smart TV operating system hardware or smart TV hardware. The display will always work until it doesn't, but the software itself is going to become obsolete at some point. And so it makes sense for these small modular handheld or hand-sized computers because you can just slap that on the back of your TV with some Velcro and bada bing, bada boom, update your smart computer or your smart TV. It's now a computer that you can watch all of your streaming content. And they make smart remotes that you can, communicate back and forth so you can still have the remote control experience if that's like absolutely necessary. Although a wireless mouse and wireless keyboard is like a super remote.
actually going through it. I had software control over my, or yeah, it was software remote control for the previous television, but this one is has a hardware physical remote, and it's the power button's dying. So I'm like trying to find software control, and none of them have ad free installing. Where I'm like, I feel like advertising is the death of the mind. Like advertising is such a fucking parasite on human attention. That's where I'm like, man, I'm just not gonna do it. Like if it means that I'm not that I have to like walk to the television eventually to turn it on, okay. I'm just not installing something that is making me either pay for it or gonna force me to view advertisements and not allow me to block the ads. Cause that's where I'm like, at least on certain shit I can, use ad blocker.
Yeah, just to turn a TV on
Um,
though that you've already paid for.
right. Fuck that.
Like, what an insult! Like those
Yeah.
motherfuckers. I think that's that at that point you just look up the model number and go to eBay and find a replacement remote.
Yeah. Well, I think it's under warranty still, so I can just go see if they might replace it at the place I got it from. But
Yeah,
I still want to have to do that because that's like more effort than necessary for a fucking power button.
yeah. At some point, like the time that we spend has to be valued. We have to value it for ourselves. Otherwise,
For
it's
sure.
other people start to devalue or just
Mm-hmm.
you know treat our time like it's worthless, and then and that's no good.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
a remote's pretty important though.
it is, and that's where I'm like, I tried the software route, but I'm just tired of advertising. Period. It's like it's become one of the things that I'm just really just going to stay resistant against. Like I'm not going to let advertising take my attention or energy when I'm not volunteering it because it's like
Yeah,
uh
ads and paywalls. If a
yeah,
media outlet wants my attention, they're not going to make me pay to read some material that I can go find somewhere else on Associated Press. That's just messed up. Especially when they get most of their ad they get ad revenue from people just physically or going to the website and viewing content on their website. They're like double dipping in the well.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's even more frustrating when news organizations like put what they're claiming to be important information behind the paywall. I'm like, fuck you for trying to exploit my need to know something about something that may impact me. Like, that's fucked up. Or even worse, when it's like a story about someone dying or some shit where you're like, you're selling ads on someone's death. This is fucked. This society, like, it's like not fucked up in the way that Christian pseudo Christian right wingers say it's fucked up. It's fucked up in a whole different kind of way, which is like, not to say that uh, capitalism is the only bad force, but when you see advertisements being sold on stories that are about death, especially when it's like I mean, one person's death is bad enough, but when it's like a story about like mass death or some shit, it's like I I just struggle to understand how it got to a point where that's even legal.
Well, you got to pay money to get a lot of news about any conflict zone at this point. And except for Ukraine, Ukraine is definitely up front and center.
Yeah.
If you want to watch Russians or Ukrainians get blown up on TV or on the internet, it's like every place has a link to it, and it's disgusting. It's
Yeah, it's really
really it's
gross.
so disturbing. Like no matter where I go on the internet, there's a fucking link to the war in Ukraine and people dying. It's like they're thriving off of
Man.
this stuff. I read this piece about European banks are making a killing on Russian debt right now,
Oof.
like hand over fist. They're like raking in profits somehow, and I'm pretty sure that means they're profiting from war.
Right. Yeah,
That's
all this war
so fucked
profiteering
up.
with all this advertising for the war where it's like they just turned it into a fucking TV show or a news advertising venue, and it's like they just don't care about the long-term implications where I'm like, how do these, I mean, I'm sure they don't care where they sleep at night just fine, but I'm like, how did these people who exploit this, uh, and then it's like you don't see it when American government is doing it to other people. So it's like, oh, so you do have the capacity to show the impact of imperialism. You just don't do it when we're doing the imperialism. So there's all these aspects of it where I'm like, what what happened? How did Americans get this propagandized and have all their information censored in such a way where they still think that they have the freest place on earth while not clearly seeing the manipulation that's happening in their media? It's like it makes my head hurt to try to figure out like
I think
how
that
did we even get here?
I think a lot of people aren't paying attention because the news is just so depressing. It's depressing as fuck. You turn you look to any broadcast news, which is I'm assuming is what most people have access to. Um, it's just it's like doom and gloom everywhere you every time. Like occasionally they have some like positive or feel good piece about somebody and their dog, or somebody having a small business success in this tumultuous time for small businesses, and we get a few of those. But even I was talking to my dad about this the other day. When every year I look at the Time Year in Review, because that they always have like the best photographers submit their work, and like 99% of it is black and white, and it's suffering. And the 1% that's in color that does feel good is like pictures of flowery fields, or a few people smiling at a parade. Like maybe two or three people are actually in focus in that picture of the parade. So three people out of the entire image are having a good time. Like and that's like, you go back if you go back decades, that's what the year in review looks like. It's just, I mean, I'm sure I'm missing the point, and there's a lot of context that's being lost, but our history is like suffering. Our that's what people are will pay attention to for some reason, or that's what they remember. And so maybe when they see something on TV and it's even worse than what they kind of remember being the past, I don't know. I don't know what other people remember, but it just seems like we're filling the internet with the wrong kind of memories if we want to have like a history that is like really positive, because so much of the internet is garbage or pain and suffering, or profit at the expense of others or others suffering. That's like, I remember taking an ethics class at one time, and I thought that it was like mandatory at the university level. But it seems like some people think it's okay to tell jokes at the expense of others, or to profit at the expense of others, and they think it's okay. It's like, this is just fine. This is the way it is. This is America. This is the way it's always been. And it's just sad. It's like it's just sad. How
Yeah,
can
it feels like mocking humans is passe, and there's some people who don't want to let that go.
Yeah.
But it's like you can't really just make fun of people anymore. Like it doesn't even matter why. It doesn't hold up. Like we're supposed to be a species that gets better. So if we're like, hey, comedy evolves and there's all these situations and these other things that you can make fun of, so you don't have to make fun of people anymore. Because making fun of people just isn't really funny.
No.
Not to say that you can't find things to laugh at, but like when you sit there and think about what's happening, it's no longer funny. So that's why it's like, yeah, maybe just don't make fun of people anymore. So it's weird to see comedians not want to let go of roasts. Roasts were weird anyway, where I'm like, okay, I came to a comedy show. I didn't come here to get made fun of.
Or to
Or,
listen to people get made fun of, or make fun of
right,
other
or to
people.
have somebody behind me made fun of. Like, I thought we were going to laugh about things that we could all find common, like, not have to be the subject of being the butt of a joke just so everyone else can laugh. Like, idea that one person suffering for the sake of everyone else's laughter is okay is like absolutely ridiculous. It's just absurd. Now I think that's definitely something that
The culture of
like
comedy needs to address this because
yeah.
it's completely in their hands. These are the people that
Yep.
are claiming to be the visionaries of humor and what's funny and the deliverers of jokes and storytellers. Like they've got to tell stories,
Mhm.
and it's making a make up a person, create an imaginary fake person, and make fun of them for doing stupid things because they don't exist. Sure, I mean that's make up a scenario. That's easy. But that requires some creativity, I guess.
Yeah, they just don't have
It's
that.
yeah. I think that it's really tough actually right now because there's so many people, so many creative people out there who are doing their best, and a lot of them are doing really good jobs. And the whims of the audience is so fickle that at a whim they can change their mind and decide that somebody's no longer entertaining. And then their moment in the sun is over and they are essentially forgotten by the masses. They still have, fans, they still have people who remember them, who will go and see their shows, but they're just not in the limelight anymore. Um, it happens more often with bands. Like there was a band, I think it was like 10 years ago or so, called Kings of Leon, and by the time that they had like broken through to the mainstream, they had like a dozen albums or something, half a dozen albums, and they're still a band. I think they're still touring, they're still doing their thing, but they're just not in like the public's eye. And I don't think that that's their goal. I think their goal is just to be a band and to make music and to have fun and tell stories. And I think what happens is that we see, and the masses seem to love it when artists who can't seem to let go of the spotlight start doing shit that's like out of character or no longer it's no longer even what people really want, just so they can hold on to some attention.
The meltdown phase.
Yeah, that's it. The meltdown phase.
They love the meltdown phase.
Yeah, people love watching people fail for some fucked up
Hmm.
reason. That's like the most sick. That's the sickest part of it all. Not only has making fun of people become the standard, but watching them fail has become like the cherry. What happened to this a society that like supported people and built each other up? And oh wait, that's Star Trek. Uh,
You got to look to a fictional place for that.
yeah, But at least we have those places. At least somebody figured out that we can create a world that's that gives us hope. That it's like, hey, maybe this can exist. If we believe in this example enough and strive to achieve it, maybe we can have that better world. Holy crap! I know this. It's like a really complex concept.
Man,
I don't think we're on the path to the better world actually right now.
doesn't feel like it for sure.
No,
Um,
it feels like we're on the path of helping a few people consolidate wealth so they can leave.
they're not gonna leave. They're definitely not gonna leave because they can't even keep like fucking satellites in orbit, let alone. It's so funny. The way that you see the Muskites, the Muskie cult, like think that Elon is gonna just solve like the problems that NASA couldn't solve, and then
Right? Like he's
all the faith he can't even get the fucking shit he promised in 2019 done.
well, the
Like
Cybertruck is still on hold. They're
where's the
gigantic.
Tesla taxis?
Yeah, the Tesla taxis don't exist. The Tesla semi truck isn't happening yet. I think Walmart's going to achieve the autonomous semi system before Tesla does.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it. Because then the Tesla bot bullshit.
That tiny person in a suit.
There's just been so much grifting in the past. Like, why does he own part of Twitter now? You know what I'm saying? It's like you'd think he'd be buying up robotics companies instead of Twitter.
I I
No, this motherfucker's just out here grifting.
I can't even with Twitter anymore now. Like
Yeah,
I
it's
just
real.
don't. That guy, man. I mean, got to give him credit. He knows where he wants to have influence, and he goes for it. And he's been remarkably successful at accomplishing that goal of influence.
Hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see the next 10 years as our domestic automakers and the foreign makers who have interest in American markets shift production to meet demand and requirements for the vehicles. Because I don't think
Are you looking?
I don't think that we would have this much of a push towards electric vehicles had it not been for the early investment of Toyota in the Tesla project. I don't. I think that. I mean, I do. I do. We do need to give him a little bit of credit. I'm pretty sure that without his,
I mean, I don't think so because it's like it's ultimately the government like push that did it. It was the government banning the shit by
yeah,
2030.
but they didn't. They
Like
weren't gonna do that. Like that's all.
that has nothing to do with him so much
I know,
as
but like,
again that's the
but
oil
like
companies.
public
That's where again
instrument.
like I don't want to give him any credit because other people tried it before Tesla. I mean, even
But they
then
weren't.
it's like he didn't even start Tesla.
I
So that's
know.
where
I know. I know.
like
Like he bought the
his
Roadster from
whole
South
thing.
America, from South Africans.
Well, but his whole push was about being able to sell independently as an a car company that sold directly to the client without going to through
A
the
dealership.
dealership, and then his dealerships fucked the clients over. So his whole thing was just a way to like make the process able to be more exploited, and in the process, they didn't guarantee that they're gonna use safe uh
I know.
like
No, no, I know.
collector
I
vehicles.
know.
So
But
it's
like
like
he
this whole
convinced,
thing
but
was
he convinced a
very.
significant portion of the people who could afford to buy those vehicles to buy those vehicles. And now we've got a culture of people that are proselytizing the Tesla, like on every level. Like
But
he,
that's not good for. But it's not good for electric vehicles because it's like those people make electric vehicles look bad, and then the industry response is to just copy Tesla's style, which is only catering to a cultish tech bro that's following Elon's uh his personality and not the actual
But they'd been
best car
all
design.
of the domestic car manufacturers had been like, shaving off of the smaller and economical vehicles in favor of the larger SUVs and trucks. Like they were just following the market too, and now they're continuing to follow the market, which exists because Tesla exists. I'm not saying it's a
And
good
that's what
thing. It's just we wouldn't
well
have
that's
the current state of electric vehicle development that we
and
have now had he not
and that's
created a
why
market horribly.
and that's why I'm saying like I don't want to give him any credit because you look at the electric Mustang and it's like a fucking half SUV that looks like a Cayenne ripoff because of the way that the market followed
It's
like
so
Tesla's
hideous.
example, and it's fucking
It's
terrible. It's
so
terrible.
hideous. It's
It's
the
horrible.
ugliest
So that's where
Mustang.
I'm like, the way that
They should have called it like the
if
Clydesdale or something. It's not a
because
Clydesdales
my
aren't
here's my
ugly
thing.
horses though. I'm not trying to
Here's
miss
my
it.
thing. The oil dependence is unsustainable. So at some
Yeah.
point, it was gonna have to shift to electric anyway. That shit was inevitable. So the idea that Elon is like the catalyzing force is like partially true, but that would I would definitely argue that it would have happened if Elon existed or not because the oil
We'd have need to one way or another.
dependence exactly
Yeah.
it's unsustainable. Even down to go look at the fucking electric cars that they're building in Dubai and they're not even talking about that shit here because it makes Tesla look really stupid.
Well,
Like
even the ones
electric
that
cars
China's making make Tesla look stupid.
yeah. Oh, for sure, for sure. But
Mm.
the UAE super fucking high, the super electric cars,
I think
it
India
just,
has an electric car now
whew.
too, and their electric car is pretty impressive.
Hmm.
I think the thing that is, I really do believe that we would be waiting. We would have a very different EV market right now. It would be more like we would have like an electric Prius instead of full size vehicles. They wouldn't be catering towards this high powered demand that is kind of an extension of muscle cars. Because I don't care what anyone says. There's no way that any electric car, once you put the battery in it, can can meet the the weight expectations of a sports car. Like you got to build a special race car for that kind of thing, and those things have very limited range, and they have to recharge. They have to like change batteries like all the time. I think we would have super. They would all be like Leafs or the Bolt. They wouldn't be gigantic luxury cars. Even Chevy discontinued the Volt, which was their range extended gas powered electric vehicle, which I think is actually, well, the idea is superb, but the execution was left to be desired, and it was also an ugly car. A lot of these cars look like they've already been in an accident too, which I don't really like.
So I pasted a link to the Rimac Navara. I think that's how you say it. I don't know, but um, that's like what United Arab Emirates EV Labs is putting out. Where
Oh yeah, it looks like a hypercar.
yeah, but that's where I'm like, they would have done that shit if Tesla never existed. You know what I'm saying?
That
And that's what I mean. Like
if
because this is clearly not influenced by Tesla.
if
This
uh,
is clearly not influenced by
if
Tesla.
that had existed a decade ago or whatever, when the Roadster was before Tesla bought the Roadster design from that South African company, they probably would have bought this if the price had been right. I mean, he didn't.
I mean, maybe, but I don't know if the way that they're producing it was meant for that purpose. I don't think they're trying to make a production car that everybody can buy, which is like on the one hand, that's obviously a goal for making electric cars more accessible, but the way it turned out, it didn't actually result in that either. Um, so again, if it's like the way I see it, if you have the racing team or the highest level of a car being made, then the commercial version is going to be like half powered or quarter powered, but with a similar aesthetic to it. So that's where I'm like, the way that they're making their top tier cars is definitely like, again, I don't even think they're trying to make a commercial version of this
Yeah.
necessarily, but that's how the general
Well, I mean, I don't even think that
top tier to commercial
at the
versions
high
work.
end of production cars like the Koenigsegg's and the the really the super illustrious the hypercar world, those companies aren't geared. They're not scalable. They can't build thousands of those.
Right.
Volkswagen had to acquire Lamborghini so they could make the Audi R8 in mass, and the Audi R8 is basically like a mass production Lamborghini, and in the process, Lamborghini gained a whole bunch of like knowledge in how to make reliable vehicles, and they started making more vehicles every year because they had access to that kind of toolage. But it took essentially the manufacturing DNA that Volkswagen possessed of mass production to apply it to a different paradigm to make those things work. I don't think that a company like, I mean, Tesla had to do a lot of growth really fast to be able to mass produce what they do, and it's still. I don't think I don't think it could ever compare to what Volkswagen does or
And they
Toyota.
can't even keep up with their own orders
And they
though. And
exactly
even then,
and then their cars don't even stay together. They break down. They're too new. They're too new to be breaking down. This technology is supposed to be cutting edge and state of the art, but it's like, it still fails, and it costs more to repair than normal vehicles. And of course the whole like carbon footprint argument disappeared very quickly once it was revealed that an electric vehicle has more of a carbon footprint because of the batteries.
yeah, for sure. Yep. And they've got like $1 billion worth of subsidies.
Yeah.
They've got $1 billion worth of subsidies, and neither of us is getting a return on that investment. So that's where I'm like, that whole structure of like this one person being able to, not just one person, but an organization represented by one person being able to take out $1 billion worth of subsidies. Obviously, that's not the whole production cost, but the fact that they can do that and then take all the credit and then concentrate it into one person that didn't even do anything on the engineering
That's
side,
an even more
because then
successful
people will be
grip.
like, "Oh, he's got patents." Like, no, he's like on a few. He's like a co-writer on a few patents that don't necessarily have anything to do with anything in Tesla.
Yeah,
So like
PayPal
the way
and
that,
they're mostly PayPal, right?
yeah, and even then he didn't create the main brunt of the tech that's on the patents. So it's like the way that his ability to get subsidies and leverage those subsidies to then invest in an organization that is 100% private in their returns and exploits that system in a way that doesn't benefit the populace unless they give him their money. I'm like, not only I don't want to give him any credit, I think he's made everything worse because he gives this semblance of forward progress when, as you pointed out, the carbon footprint is now worse because they went through so much trouble to make this car without giving rise or without giving attention to uh, the polluting aspects. In the process, super racist factory conditions, apparently, enough to get them a class action lawsuit from like 4,000 people where they're being having the black people
Yeah, that's
working in the part
fucked
of the
up.
factory where they're calling it slave ship. I am definitely not giving this motherfucker any credit. I'm only anti Elon Musk because he's allowed like institutional racism within his private organization, and then he'll double down on it when he's called out on it. So that's why I'm like, fuck this guy, fuck everything he's done, because it's like a empty facade down to like when an American drives a Tesla, they get this like haughty, like self sense of accomplishment as if they're like going green when your fucking Ranger is better for the environment.
Yeah, because it's 27 years old and it's already like
you know what I'm saying? So again, it's like people will scoff at your truck when your truck is long-term better for the fucking environment than the Tesla because of the way that the Tesla is built and the conditions under which it's produced. So that's where I'm like, long story short, because he's leaning into the market, free market, regulate in the way that allows us to produce, not the way that's actually green. I'm like, this dude is the worst kind of neoliberal because he's not even a liberal. He's not even a fucking liberal at that. This is like post-apartheid, like yeah, they like always leave out the apartheid money. This is apartheid money coming in, getting American subsidies, going back to Africa, exploiting it again, hiding it, and then making it so if you segregated work conditions, and then making it so if you buy his shit, it makes you feel like you're a superior person because you're giving the appearance of being green
you're Tesla.
When it's like, oh God. It's like
it's a badge.
It is. It's a hollow badge at that. It's a very hollow badge. Cause I used to want a Tesla because of what I thought they were, but once I started looking into like all of the things that go into like creating the batteries and how it's not actually, they haven't improved the pollution on that. So it's like all of the, and then you find out the child labor, all of the things involved in creating a Tesla are like, it's almost like, again, that's why I'm like, they've almost made the conditions worse than if we would have just naturally gone off of oil dependence because we would have had to. Like, again, the oil, like when you have UAE investing in electric, it's because the oil can't last forever, and even they know that shit. So it's like, eventually, our cars, because maybe this type of electric car wasn't the proper route. You know what I mean?
That's what I mean. I think if we hadn't had a Tesla, we would have had a much more economical, more affordable, probably a completely government subsidized electric vehicle.
Yeah.
But, you know, he did quite a bit to spur the development of electric vehicles. I think every one of our domestic auto manufacturers would have been asleep at the wheel on this. They would have been waiting for the absolute deadline. And then they've been asking for permission to extend the deadline or a continuance or whatever the fuck they call it. Because I don't think that they would have acted because they were in the business of wringing out as much oil money as they could.
But he was also like trying to knock down high-speed rails unless they were his Hyperloop while promoting the electric vehicles. So it's like, largely because of him, we don't have any high-speed rail projects.
Okay, so I was actually unaware of that, and that makes me very mad.
Yeah, yeah, bro. Because this is the problem. We were on the verge of getting high-speed rail projects, but his promise of electric vehicles is what got a lot of that shit derailed.
He got it.
Like, straight up.
He got it railroaded.
Straight up him. Yeah, straight up, because he was like, well, high-speed rails won't work for this, but if we build Hyperloops, which we've started working on, then this will work. So his promise of the electric vehicle and the fucking Hyperloops is why Obama administration and fucking by proxy, the Trump administration didn't do any goddamn long high-speed rail. Like, they had mapped out the corridors for the high-speed rail projects. They were on paper. These things were starting to be proposed. But he's very much one of the people who was like, no, these won't work unless they're underground. and they have to be hyperloops.
They won't
And that's the
work.
only way I can imagine
Wait,
it
wait,
because
wait,
I'm
wait.
Elon.
Wait, was it something? I can't imagine any scenario on Earth where building a tunnel is more geologically stable than having a elevated system above that can be adjusted.
Of course not. Of course
There's
not.
no condition because of physics that allows for,
No,
a
man. Of
tunnel
course not.
to remain
Yeah, you're being
stable.
rational. You're being rational right now. Of course. Yeah, of course.
Oh my
Of course.
goodness.
But no, this idiot convinced people that it was Hyperloop or nothing. So that's where I'm like, man, knowing how our transportation map landscape could have changed, it's like it's even more car dependent now because he pushed us away from high speed rails. And that influence he definitely used to like make it seem like he was good. Like that's how he got the Hyperloop fucking contracts in the first place. Is like him convincing people that we needed to start building tunnels instead of trains. Like it's man, and that's where learning how much of the train systems were deconstructed for automobiles within the last 100 years is super frustrating because then you see like we drive over defunct railroads all the time in
Man,
Bloomington, not realizing there was a train
you
from
you just
Bloomington to
you
Indianapolis.
just reminded me of this video that I watched on YouTube of this guy who had spent the last decade digging a tunnel on his property in England. And he's got quite a bit of property. He's got like a barn and then a garage and a wood shop and then the house. And they're all connected with underground tunnels that you've got to climb down a ladder like 12, 15 feet to get down to the tunnel network. And then there's a freaking like, rails with a train car, a trolley to get through the whole fucking thing. So he can like get to all of his places without ever having to go outside. And so I did I did some digging, and I learned that this is actually a thing, like all over the world. But it's really limited to a socioeconomic class. Mostly the independently
Huh.
wealthy lives on old family property, and these tunnels have been being dug. Some of them are generational, multi-generational tunnels that people are just digging. So I think this is like a rich man's game. Like the idea, let's dig a tunnel. Let's dig a fucking
I'm like,
tunnel. That's a good idea. We need people to dig us a tunnel.
these are the same people that would like build homes in nuclear fallout or in the missile silos that are like, what is it, a couple 100 feet deep.
How the fuck are these cave dwellers amassing so much wealth?
They steal it.
Yeah.
Their grandparents stole it. They stole it. Somebody stole it.
No
They
wonder they want
didn't.
to
They
go
didn't
hide in
invent
a
anything.
cave.
Exactly. Exactly. That's exactly right.
Ugh.
It's like Elon's grandfather or grandfather stole that shit
Yeah, he
and
has
then
old
tried to make
diamond
it.
money, right? Old blood diamond money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Made it seem like he earned that shit. Man, again, our media is so much propaganda for rich families trying to make it seem like they like work their way into that shit instead of stealing it from our family members. Like anybody listening to this in the past or the future, I mean not the past, like
Yeah, in the
currently
past, if you're listening to
or
this in the past too, seriously, if you,
you too.
yeah,
Yeah.
straight up.
Because time obviously flows in both directions. So yeah, people in the past, you guys too, people. But anyone listening to this has had their shit stolen from them and has some rich person create some propaganda to make it seem like they worked for that shit that was stolen from them. So again, that's where I'm like, as much as we're being bombarded with imagery of Ukraine and their suffering and like the Russians abusing them, it's like, well, that's what America does to people. That's what fucking the American government goes and does so this upper class can live. And then they'll do it to us in the lower classes and make it seem like the upper class is somehow just lucked by working into that instead of them having militarized forces to go steal shit for them. It's like as much as TSA and the cops just steal from American citizens and then turn around and use that stolen money or what they consider contraband so they can steal it, it's just a big game of fucking theft. So that's where I'm like, all these quote unquote rich people have just been stealing. Like, amassed wealth is unnatural. It's unnatural for many reasons. You can't get that wealthy without doing some fucked up shit. Somewhere down the line, somebody's doing some fucked up shit so a person can be massively disproportionately wealthy. There's no way to get there without exploitation. Oh, Bill Gates. Yeah, he exploited the fuck out of people along the way. Every step of the way, he's exploiting some people. Whether it's pretending he's got the licenses to some software he doesn't have, or overpricing the software to then make an insane amount of money. This whole notion of like outsized wealth is built upon someone getting exploited for one reason or another. Oh, this art piece that this fucking dumb shit Picasso fucking made is worth millions of dollars. Fuck Picasso. He's mocking you by doing this shit. So like the idea that these people who have no knowledge of art can then come in and buy something that they think is worth millions of dollars from an artist who's mocking that whole notion and is somehow able to like get away with the ruse and have their family get away with the ruse and their estate would get away with the ruse. Like, it's because all those people are dependent upon the illusion being perpetuated. So they invest in the propaganda. They invest in the fucking MTV Cribs. They invest in the fucking movies to make us think that these things are attainable and somehow possible if you just work hard enough, when in reality just fucking stole it. And then they're lying to you about how they got it. So it's like all this shit, man. That's why I don't give Elon Musk credit. Full circle.
Hey, you know,
that's why I refuse.
No, that's a very well reasoned explanation.
And I figured you would understand.
No,
it's like
you reminded me of something when you said MTV Cribs. The first two letters of MTV are empty. and that's I think that's pretty symbolic of a lot of like the gestures that are made by the media. Mm-hmm. They're all empty gestures. They just got to fill some space so they can keep the attention.
Have you watched any Twin Peaks?
No, I haven't actually.
So this is like, I've been watching a lot of Twin Peaks lately, and I
probably should. Okay, I need a good story-driven story instead of a visually-driven story.
But it's both. So this is why it's also good. My introduction to David Lynch was like Dune, and then.
Do you ever watch Blue Velvet?
No, the only things I've really watched of his were Dune and Twin Peaks.
Yeah.
So the whole reason that's important is because I was never really like a big David Lynch quote unquote fan, but once I started like listening to him talking, I'm like, oh shit, this dude's an anti-capitalist.
Yeah.
So not only is he an anti-capitalist, he's very much an advocate for meditation. So then when you like listen to him talk, he's always talking about promoting meditation, and then he'll never clarify his art because he wants his art to speak on its own. So that's this whole other aspect of like, there's something to that artist existing where I'm like, oh, this is like, I don't need that validation from my perspective, but I'm like, he's been able to go through his life and not make financial success his metric for success and still feel like his work is validated. So that's why I'm like, there's nothing wrong with focusing on your work as the metric for your own success instead of other people's, what they think that you made at the box office or what they think that you made in your bank account. Because at the end of the day, inflation wipes that shit away anyway, but nobody fucking actually cares. Like, all of David Lynch's fans don't give a fuck how much money the movies make. That's not what they're there for.
No.
They're there for the story. They're there for the experience. They want to have a story told to them in a way that allows him to explore the world in which he's describing in the best way he possibly can. That has nothing to do with how much money it makes. Now,
that's actually why I really like John Carpenter films.
Oh yeah, his too. And Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi. So there's these people that you see as artists do things where you're like, okay, Sam Raimi, I don't even think he sold out. He just got popular in a way that his style became
Spider-Man.
His style became acceptable to the mainstream enough that his style started getting into big box office movies. He didn't really change his style all that much.
His style's been the same since Evil Dead.
Exactly.
The crazy thing about Evil Dead is like there's that scene where the camera's flying through the woods and it seems to like fly through things. Apparently, and this is like kind of a precursor to the Steadicam. And they invented this. They took a plank of wood and they taped or strapped the camera to it so two people could hold it and run through the woods. And that's how they kept it stable, made it look like it was flying. And this turned into every variation of remote camera operation that we see today, where they have a camera moving at high speed, like when they have it on the cable for like sports, or in a big movie when they want to show a camera like flying through a cityscape. That all started with Sam Raimi and his production team on Evil Dead. The dude is a genius.
Yeah,
like
sure.
Straight up, like we would have our action scenes would have waited for a decade or more to come up with that idea.
Yeah.
There's a whole group of directors, of cinematographers and directors and storytellers that I don't think they'll ever actually be popular in the United States. I don't think that the American audience is ready for that kind of storytelling.
Oh, here's proof. Okay, so this is a great example. So when this is one of the things that I started that made me better understand the dynamics. I mean, you know of it and you hear it, but when you actually see it play out is when you start to understand what it truly means. So if you listen to David Lynch talk about Dune, he absolutely hates that film because the studio got too much control over it. So he started to be like, he started to go towards like, if he didn't get final cut, he would just walk away from shit. Well, with Twin Peaks, the original story, he and Mark Frost didn't want the murder solved, and that was supposed to be the main crux of what kept the show running. Is like, you have this murder and it never gets solved. Well, at the time that was completely unprecedented. So like,
the bad guy can't win.
The studios, well, even down to like, usually people were used to the murder being solved within that week, let alone a series that never resolves it. So like, after season 1, the executives decided like, hey, you need to solve this murder, or I mean, they were pretty much on the chopping block anyway. And like, they started moving around the show and all this shit where it's like, they're clearly trying to set it up for failure. So Lynch like walks away for like the first half of the season 2. And then he comes back when they allow him to have more control over the shit, even though it's basically already ruined that mystery. But then they allow he and Frost to get more control. So between that and then they make a movie, you see the dynamic of the show go through this weird, like season 2 is just fucking weird. But you see they're trying to be like David Lynch, but they don't understand why David Lynch is popular. So they're just like throwing shit at a wall, like maybe it'll stick. And they're just being weird for the sake of being weird.
Oh, that's like season 4 of Community, season 3,
exactly. It's the same fucking shit. Same thing happens. But then Lynch gets back involved with the movie, and then subsequently the following season. So that's where knowing all that, it allows me to read the material different. But even further, then I read other material different when I see like for example, when I'm watching Smallville and you see a car, you're like, oh, I wonder how much this company paid to get this there. It's like I mean, you know that there's product placement, but when you see directors not give into product placement versus the ones that clearly take money to do shit, it's like it's hard not to like be super critical of everything when I see other artists not making decisions based on capitalist executive influence. It's like, oh, so you don't have to do everything. Like, you don't have to do everything for the executive, but you sacrifice the capacity to be super rich from producing. So it's like, on the one hand, David Lynch is never going to be rich from making movies, like super rich, but it's because he doesn't compromise his vision. So that's also where I'm like, the same thing happened with fucking Nikola Tesla. You know, yeah. So it's like you really in this environment, you have to either give your vision total focus or compromise it for money. They force you to do that shit.
So in the 80s when cars exploded on film and in television, I wonder how much damage that actually did to the auto industry in terms of like this image of exploding cars. Because in movies,
I mean,
when you see a gas station explode in a movie,
the Gremlin was happening. So the Pinto and the Gremlins were happening. So that was more believable when you had cars just exploding on the street because they had subpar fucking gas tanks. You know what I mean? So it's like, to us, we have regulations in place so that shit doesn't happen. But in the 70s, this shit was happening, bro.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Because this is why the Teslas explode. This is why the Teslas explode. It's the same shit. They want to rush shit to market and cut corners and pay off the fucking investors. So then you get the fucking exploding Pintos, just like you get the exploding Teslas, because the regulators don't know fuck all about the shit they're regulating. Because they got there because of a popularity contest. So that's where this whole thing is a joke. It's like, also why, on the other hand, I'm like, it can only last a little bit longer. This whole thing is falling apart.
Well, Tesla's truck is never going to be able to compete with the Chevy or Ford electric trucks or the Dodge electric truck, because those have an installed user base that are like loyal beyond. I mean, they're the definition of brand loyalty. Truck owners are absolutely the most brand loyal people.
They're gonna resist it until they can't.
They are, and when they do finally buy in, they're gonna go and get their trusty Ford or Chevy or Dodge electric truck. They're not gonna get the Tesla truck that you can't even get your arm over the side of the bed. You can only unload access from the tailgate. They're not gonna go for that.
Well, and then like, okay, so my sister and her husband put down an order for the Tesla truck last year, and I'm like, you guys know they're not gonna be able to deliver that, right? And they're like, whatever. And I'm like, okay, just wait. And then now it's not delivered. So like, there's no way when other companies are delivering trucks, they're just gonna wait around for fucking this. Because here's the thing: the first wave of Tesla trucks to get delivered, they're only going to deliver them to special people. So the actual regular people, like my sister and her husband that put in order, they're not going to get the first wave because they're going to, like, they want the visible celebrities to have the Tesla trucks first. So their limited production line that they're finally going to be able to release, it's not going to go to regular people.
Meanwhile, Ford and Chevy are going to release 100,000 each of their electric truck to dealerships.
And they're going to be cheap.
And they're going to be affordable.
And they're going to look awesome.
Yep.
And so people like my sister and husband aren't going to fucking wait around for this warthog Halo ripoff looking like shit that's not gonna actually be able to go off road
That
when they get a Ford that's gonna
it's a very apt
they're not gonna wait
comparison
around.
visually, but it's like the like opposite of the warthog.
Yeah, it's like it's all of the visual elements of the warthog and none of its functionality, just like everything else in capitalism.
Okay, so speaking of the warthog and Halo, I've been watching the Halo TV show. They're on episode 3, I believe, and it's okay. All of the sounds, like touch me right in my memories of Halo Combat Evolved, like all the way back to the original. Like that's where how accurate these sounds are, and the placement in the soundscape and all that stuff. And I've mentioned it in our Discord, but there's a contemporary like 2000s era, maybe 20 teens era Chevy Tahoe located on a alien world in the distant future, and I'm so impressed by this. I am like unbelievably impressed by this because in my mind, of course, it's either Chevy still makes the Tahoe in the future and it's still one of the best SUVs you can get, or somebody in the future happens to love classic vehicles and they've managed to keep this hundreds of year old vehicle running on a different planet. And I think that's really cool. And that's a really weird explanation for something that probably some prop master probably forgot to get their truck off the set.
That's the like best faith interpretation. I'm like, oh, of course they paid to get that shit in the
Of
shot.
course they did.
You're like giving them the best like
Oh yeah.
benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
That's like, man, that's the best faith interpretation ever.
Obviously, there is no Tahoe that's going to survive the trip to another planet. It's just not.
Unless, but again, that's where I'm like, I don't know. Did you ever watch Smallville?
Yeah.
It's like anytime you see a car, it's like, oh, this motherfucker's about to crash.
Yeah.
So it's like in that same vein where it's like, I I'm not averse to seeing vehicles. It's like only when they're used in a way where I'm like, okay, I'm okay with seeing that Toyota logo just because I know it's about to fucking flip. Like it's and again, there's nothing there's got to be cars there's got to be vehicles.
Yeah.
I mean, not to say that in the future on the distant planet there should be a Chevy Tahoe, but if it works, if they can make it work, it works.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's like
it's funny because it's like parked off in the distance, and like none of the explosions during the fight scene happen anywhere near it. I'm inclined to believe that it was like the prop master's truck, and he snuck it on there, or they snuck it on there, or they forgot to move it, or they didn't realize that it was going to be in view of one of the camera angles. Like, it's just one of those things that I'm more inclined to believe like stupidity resulted in the appearance of the Tahoe in the future distant world than than product placement.
not like Game of Thrones where they had the coffee cups
Yeah.
in the shots.
Or in Game of Thrones when they're walking around a courtyard and you can see modern cut timber like 2x6s and chipboard and pocket holes for pocket from a pocket jig so they can hide the screws and that they didn't cover up and they weren't painted. There's an entire scene where they're walking around this courtyard and they're very clearly like not finished construction. Like either they were just doing a test of the scene and then every subsequent attempt resulted in a failure and this was the only capture that resulted in good footage, or they just couldn't get the paint on in time. I don't know how that stuff works because they went to the trouble of modifying like a bunch of castles and building all this stuff, and so to think that they just dropped the ball on a paint job.
They just dropped the ball in the last couple of seasons, honestly.
Dude,
Who watched that.
I'm really disappointed in Game of Thrones. Not the production, the characters. all of the characters are lying sacks, and they all suck, and they're all just horrible people. And the only honest person in the whole story, the only person who was very clear from the get go about what they wanted, gets murked by her fucking nephew boyfriend. Like, she's the only honest person. And that's the fucked up part. She gets sold into slavery, and then she somehow becomes like the savior of the people, and then they fucking kill her just so they can preserve their institution. Yeah, it's such bullshit.
Are you talking about Khaleesi?
Yeah, no, the Daenerys Targaryen chick.
Yeah, she definitely like descended into madness.
Oh yeah, she was crazy as hell, but she was the only honest person though. She was the only person in the the only character in that story who was honest about what they wanted.
Season 1 and 2, maybe 1 through 3, because that's the whole like. When people started like naming their kids after her and shit, I was like, "Oh shit, you guys stop watching." Didn't you?
That's real. That's real fucked up shit.
Because it's like when she like liberated the slaves, and I feel like if you stopped watching at that point, you're like, "Oh, this character is awesome." But then once she liberated the slave army, she started like attacking other lands, and then it was like she just became imperialist. So it was like,
yeah, she was gonna break the wheel. She never lied about any of her desires through the whole thing, though. She was always pretty upfront about it. That's the part that I found most intriguing. The only honest person in the whole world has to die. Her dragons, which are doing their thing, they're just following instinct and their nature. They have to die. Well, all but one. Because the institution. There are no institutions in Game of Thrones that are worth preserving. Is my final conclusion.
Yeah.
Everyone in that, every character, there was no innocent person in that whole story.
No.
They were all horrible people.
Well, and I think that was like what George Martin's like. I haven't read any of the books in the sense of like I've listened to him talk about it and his reaction to it. So like the way that people who read the books and also he reacted to the story, like I was fine with the story initially, but then that was just me as somebody who had invested time in it being like, okay, I'll justify these things at first, but it's like you can see the cast even gave up in the last couple of seasons.
Yeah.
Like nobody's heart's in it, and it was just kind of like at the time I don't think there was much viable alternative viewing, so I would just like keep watching it.
I watched it because I wanted to see the end of
it's
it.
like and that's part of it. You want to see how the story turns out, but then that's where you're like, no, actually you don't, because it wasn't a great ending. So that's where I've watched
it felt
every
like
episode of Lucifer except the last one. I will never watch the last episode of Lucifer because I don't like where they were taking it. I don't think I'll like where they're gonna take it. I'll never watch it.
The last 15 episodes of Game of Thrones felt like they were written by a different group of people entirely.
And I should never watch them. I should never, retrospectively.
Well, I didn't know they were written by someone else. I didn't know that was going to happen. I thought it was going to keep on with the same kind of oomph, but it didn't.
But this is also why I stopped watching The Flash and stopped watching Legends of Tomorrow.
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm not going to, it's like.
Well, Legends felt like they just didn't know how to wrap it up. They had plenty of opportunities where they could have, like, moved.
I don't know if it was meant to be wrapped up. Well, because that's why I'm like, okay, Legends seems like this, like they've gotten so far away from the original Rip, what is it, Taylor? Forget the dude's fucking name even.
I think it is Rip Taylor.
Yeah, whatever the captain's name was. We're so far away from that original storyline that it's like, yeah, it's completely Monster of the Week. But then they stopped doing the Monster of the Week even. So then it became like, I don't even know what it is now.
That's what I mean. Like
Um,
they've had opportunities where they could have wrapped it up, and the characters could have been spun off into other universes or stories or whatever. They could have kept the characters moving. But they just they didn't know when to what is it, the exit on a high note.
well, but even then, it's like I just don't think it's for us anymore. It's like because even okay, there's like a one of the characters on there is like a big pothead, and he's always like talking about he's smoking, and I'm like, oh, this is over the top in a way where I don't know who they're going after, but I don't appreciate this as a viewer. It doesn't make me
There's
appreciate the show anymore.
I can't see anyone at DC actually creating that character.
No, 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 no.
That's not that's not the kind of that's not the yeah, that's just un DC. That's like very
Well,
uncharacteristic. That's like
no,
that's a
he's
bad guy.
down to like I know the way that they wrote the character is probably some weird diversity quota thing because the character is Iranian, and it used to be a girl, but they turned it into a dude at some point, and then they brought back they like went and brought the character's sister
Wait,
back.
an
So
Iranian trans pothead?
he's not trans though. This is oh, it's so confusing that they went into a different timeline, and in that
They
timeline,
found
she
a.
turned into a
Oh my god.
like, and then they went back, but the sister now, like you said, is really a trans version of, like a trans by time shift person, who then the girl comes back, but she's like a different version of herself. So it's like now you have
Man.
two Iranian people on the show, and neither one of their characters really makes sense.
And they're
But
potheads?
like, no, just the dude,
Just the dude.
just him. She's like a straight edge, you know, like what is it, like a Valley Girl now?
Are they trying to piss off like Orthodox
I don't even
Iranians?
know. I have no idea, man. And that's where I'm like, the way that they started off and the play, I don't even know if they're at the same place anymore
Man,
because
like
I had to tap out.
yeah, what you just described, I would have tapped out too. I can't even with that show anymore. It just
Yeah,
got
I had to tap out on Supergirl.
yeah, man. I had such good hope for Supergirl. That was a good show. That was a really good show. And then
It
I
was.
can't remember what happened. It just started.
It's no longer about Supergirl. It's
Yeah,
like about the crew, which is like
it was
make a
about
spinoff.
it's about
Okay,
their
cool.
problems. It wasn't even about. It didn't even require Supergirl to solve their problems.
Yeah.
And then the
But really,
Flash. I stopped watching the Flash because it just stopped being funny.
I don't
Like
know if you've seen Superman and Lois, but that one's really like they've got a few problems, but every show has
yeah,
problems, but like that one's really well done. And then I was really enjoying Naomi, but the way that they're not marketing it, I feel like they're gonna cancel Naomi pretty soon.
oh man, I've
Um,
actually scanned by Naomi numerous
it's really
times.
good.
I didn't even know what it was. I didn't even look because I just scanned by and it's like, oh, Naomi, that seems interesting. Because I'm like looking for Picard or Discovery or whatever I was looking
Mhm.
for, and I just scroll right by. I didn't even realize that was a DC property.
Oh yeah, no, they've done a terrible job in marketing it and
No, I'm
promoting it.
serious. Like I had no idea.
Absolutely horrible. Which
I'm
is where I'm like, yeah, no, you should definitely watch it. It's
like straight
good.
up. I try to stay
But I
on
feel like
in.
they're gonna cancel it
I try to
soon.
stay like on top of that. Try to know what's going on with like DC and Marvel universes because I love that stuff. But I didn't even
Yeah.
know about this. That makes me feel like a jackass.
No, man, it's like they've done a. The only reason I know about it is because of um what's her name? Fuck, it's like blanking on me. The director, I follow her. Um, so she would like post about it before it came out, and that's the only reason I even knew about it.
Ah,
Um, fuck, I don't know why Viola Davis keeps coming to mind because Viola Davis is in DC universe, but she's not the one that directed it. Fuck, I can't think of her name right now. But anyway, like I said, the only reason I even knew about it is because happened to follow the director. They just have not been promoting it.
So, with the recent change of the Twitter board, what what do you think is going to happen? Because Mr. Musk just he blurted out that he has some big ideas. And then what's his name? The CEO talked about how like they're looking forward to working with him and seeing like what he can bring to the table. I'm
Yeah, I
my
don't know,
concern is
man.
that Twitter is just this. This is like the pure cash grab phase of Twitter. I'm not even sure if I'm pretty sure like the golden age of Twitter was like years and years and years ago. That we're in like the dust settling phase still. We're gonna see some really
Yeah.
weird shit emerge. Did you read
Uh,
about the
um,
recent inclusion of a internal JavaScript to break mentions? So if someone deletes a mention, it just shows a box instead of it might have been saved on a third party server. Now they're going through it with the JavaScript and wiping that stuff out.
did not see that.
Yeah, it's these are the kind of things that have me kind of worried because Twitter is relied on by a lot of people for communication and distribution of information. And if it's
Maybe it's better if it goes away.
is it, I mean that's like the Facebook effect where posts start losing content because somebody else somewhere in the stream decided to change their mind. Is it better if the internet forgets? Do we want that?
I think so because I think the issue becomes when people are allowed to shape their own reality, they do.
Yeah.
Um, so like for people to be able to escape into these highly refined echo chambers that then allow them to be so completely disconnected from reality that they like continue every day as if everything is fine. I think that's exactly why nothing feels like it's getting better. Because those people are constantly stuck in escapism, and then everyone else has to try to like move around those people when they're like, I just want my nostalgia, man. And they just want to revel in the nostalgia. And then ultimately that some of that nostalgia becomes like racist or transphobic or homophobic. I just want to say the F word, man. It was just a joke. It's just a joke, man. It's just jokes.
I think
So
you just described a
it's shit
new.
like that.
You just gave me the name for this kind of personality. They're called nostalgia man. That's who they are. They want to reminisce about the days of old and
Now,
talk like men did, real men. I'm not even sure what that
people
actually
who want
means
to
anymore.
preserve their nostalgia over someone else's existence. And that's where
Fucking
I'm like, those people are the ones that like make it difficult for trans people to exist or make it difficult for gay people to exist or black people. And it's like
yeah.
they use their nostalgia as an excuse all the time. All the time. This is the way it was when I grew up. I can't stand it now. Well, them being allowed to stay in their childlike mindset of what they think was like okay. I think part of it too is then Americans equate real talk with being mean. Like if I'm like telling someone like, "Hey, you're mentally stunted in your perspective," that's not me being mean to them, unless they just are so mentally stunted that they're unwilling to accept outside criticism. More so, criticism is equated as an attack on a person because then these things that they identify with as parts of themselves, if you attack the institution, you attack the church, then Christians are gonna make it seem like you attack them, like, and or you attack capitalism. Oh, somebody who's a capitalist, they get personally affected because the system makes it seem like this is another part.
But now we know that very few people are actually capitalists.
Right, right. Very few people. Well, you and I know because we're honest with ourselves. It's like you're only a capitalist if you have capital. Like otherwise, you are capital, and that's something people don't want to admit to themselves because it's a harsh truth, which they then use that escapism to get away from full circle, and that's why so it's like this whole capitalist like exploitation of people's misery of being exploited. It's that like downward spiral of inception that becomes manufactured compliance that people need to like. It's like a when you wake up out of it, it's like it sucks, but then you're like I guess that's the only way I could have gotten out of it is if I'm like okay, I gotta realize I'm stuck in this slow sand and it's slowly pulling me down, and I have to like find a way to pull myself out of this slow sand because it's not quicksand. Let's get real. It was never quicksand. It was all the reason, quote unquote, quicksand was terrifying was because it was slow. If it happened quickly, it wouldn't even be that terrifying. Like, bloop, you're gone. But it's terrifying because it's slow.
You just described like a bog.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
what happens in bogs. People just drop through and disappear.
And they can't come back up because it's a little thicker than they expected.
Yeah.
And you can't just like swim your way out of that shit. So it's like, man, if people only realize like the escapism just further pulls them into it, then they'd be more judicious about using their escapism to pull themselves out of it instead of getting sucked in. Like that's where I'm like, Twin Peaks for me is like meditation because it allows me to like examine the way that media has evolved and continuously going back to it is like, oh, these are the things that the executive now does to try to steal my attention. Somebody else is getting paid and my attention's being stolen basically from me. My time's being stolen. I'm not spending it how I want to. And in the process, they're throwing in some advertising. And then ultimately I'm looking at a fucking ET with the ad for Reese's Cups. So that's where I'm like full circle. Advertising is destroying people's minds in a way that now I'm so anti-advertising. It's like it's an acid upon knowledge and existence. And it like, again, I would never have thought I'd get to this point where I'm so anti-advertising, but I'm like really, really against it.
There's a movie called Branded. I think it's a Russian movie, or at least it takes place in Russia. And the world is so inundated with advertising and marketing and branding that it runs people's lives and it ruins people's lives. And it's worth watching. It's a decent story, and you actually I found myself kind of concerned for the characters at times, which is rare for me at this point because I have so much apathy towards characters in movies when they're just horrible people. But it's one of the few movies I've seen or stories that I've experienced in the last 5 or so years where here's a horrible person and they actually go through the protagonist's journey and change. And I think that's kind of rare now.
Well, I saw a post where somebody's like, with the understanding that all stories are not constructed in the Western manner, is the way that Westerners teach to tell stories really teaching conflict? And I was like, man, that's fucking something. Like, is our notion of conflict being inevitable because our stories are constructed around conflict? and it's like it's a real big chicken and egg thing where I'm like, obviously I don't have the answer, but that's like definitely something.
Yeah.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.